The unusual roommate. Ethan had never shared a room with anyone before, let alone an alien. The idea of living with a non-human felt strange, but the intergalactic student exchange program didn't give him much choice. The university assigned him a roommate from a distant star system, Zevra, a species known for their intelligence, logic, and complete lack of emotions. At first, Ethan thought it would be easy. Zevra didn't talk much, didn't leave a mess, and spent most of his time analyzing data on his holographic screen. Unlike human roommates, there were no loud phone calls, no dirty laundry on the floor, and no late-night parties. But something about Zevra felt unnerving. A stranger in his own room. From the moment Ethan moved in, Zevra observed him like a scientist studying an insect. Everything Ethan did, the way he ate, the way he brushed his hair, even the way he yawned, Zevra watched with cold, unblinking eyes. "Can I help you?" Ethan had asked once, feeling uncomfortable under Zevra's piercing gaze. Zevra tilted his head, the faint glow of his iridescent skin shifting under the room's dim light. "I am analyzing your behavior." "Yeah. Well, it's creepy." Zevra blinked. "Creepy." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Never mind." No understanding of personal space. Zevra had no concept of privacy. He would stand too close when Ethan was doing homework. He would suddenly walk into the bathroom while Ethan was brushing his teeth. And worst of all, he had no idea what personal boundaries meant. One evening, Ethan was getting changed, thinking he was alone. His shirt was halfway off when the door slid open. Zevra stepped in, his glowing blue eyes locking onto Ethan. Ethan froze. "Dude, what the hell?" Ethan grabbed his shirt, quickly pulling it back down. "Ever heard of knocking?" Zevra didn't move. His expression remained unreadable. "This is unusual," Zevra said, his voice slow, calculating. "What? A guy changing his shirt?" Zevra stepped closer. "No. The reaction you just had." Ethan's frustration boiled over. "It's called embarrassment. Humans don't like being stared at when they're..." Zevra tilted his head, his glowing skin flickering slightly. "Fascinating." Ethan groaned. "Not fascinating. Weird. You're weird." Zevra didn't seem offended. In fact, he looked even more intrigued. But as Ethan grabbed his jacket and stormed past him, he didn't notice the way Zevra's expression flickered, just for a second, as if something inside him had shifted. The silent change. After that night, Zevra's behavior changed. He stopped his constant staring. He no longer stood too close or walked into rooms without permission. At first, Ethan thought he had finally gotten through to him. But then something even stranger happened. Zevra started watching him differently. Not like a scientist observing an experiment, but like someone trying to understand something deeper. One night, Ethan caught Zevra staring at his reflection in the mirror. The alien's hand hovered over his own face, his expression slightly confused. Ethan frowned. "What are you doing?" Zevra turned to him. His usual robotic tone was missing when he said, "I am processing." "Processing what?" Zevra was silent for a long time before answering. "Something is different." Ethan didn't know what he meant. But for the first time since moving in, he felt a chill crawl down his spine. Something about Zevra was changing, and Ethan had a feeling it wasn't supposed to happen. The silent shift. Ethan had lived with Zevra long enough to know that aliens didn't act like this. After the night Zevra walked in on him, things had changed, but not in the way Ethan expected. At first, the alien had simply stopped staring at him like a lab experiment. That was a relief. But something else had started. Something unsettling. Zevra was watching him differently now. Not just observing, studying. And the worst part, he was mimicking him. An alien trying to be human. Ethan first noticed it at breakfast. He always had coffee in the morning. One day, Zevra walked into the kitchen, grabbed a mug, and poured himself a cup, even though Ethan had never seen him eat or drink anything before. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You drink coffee now?" Zevra lifted the mug awkwardly, his fingers stiff, as if he had only just learned how to hold something fragile. "I am attempting to understand," Zevra said, bringing the cup to his lips. He took a sip, froze. His eyes widened slightly, and his entire body shuddered. Ethan snorted. "You don't like it, do you?" Zevra stared at the cup in betrayal. "This is terrible." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "Then why are you drinking it?" Zevra hesitated. Then softly, as if the words were new and unfamiliar, he said, "Because you do." Ethan's laughter faded. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on his arms rise. Something isn't right. It wasn't just coffee. Zevra started copying small things Ethan did. He tapped his fingers against the table like Ethan when thinking. He sighed when frustrated, even though Ethan had never seen an alien sigh before. He tilted his head at jokes, like he was trying to understand humor. At first, it was just weird. But soon, it became creepy. One night, Ethan was watching a movie. A sad scene played, a human character losing someone they loved. Ethan barely noticed when Zevra sat beside him, unusually quiet. Then, as the scene reached its emotional peak, Ethan heard something he never expected to hear from an alien, a shaky breath. He turned his head. Zevra was staring at the screen, his glowing eyes slightly wider than usual. His jaw was tight. Ethan frowned. "Zevra?" Zevra blinked rapidly, as if he had just realized something was wrong. He shot up from the couch and hurried to his room without saying a word. Ethan watched him go, heart pounding. Did Zevra just feel something? The unthinkable truth. Ethan decided to confront him. He knocked on Zevra's door. No answer. "Come on, man. I know you're in there." Still silence. Ethan sighed, pushing the door open. What he saw made his stomach drop. Zevra stood in front of a mirror, his hands pressed against his chest, his fingers trembling. His skin, the normally smooth, glowing blue surface, was flickering, changing. For a brief second, Ethan thought he saw something else beneath it. Something more human. Zevra turned sharply, his eyes filled with something Ethan had never seen before. Fear. "I don't understand what is happening to me," Zevra whispered. Ethan took a cautious step forward. "Zevra, tell me the truth. What's going on?" The alien swallowed, actually swallowed, as if he suddenly had a throat that needed to move like a human's. Then he whispered something that made Ethan's blood run cold. "I am changing." Ethan's breath caught. "What do you mean changing?" Zevra looked away, gripping the edge of his desk, his posture tense. "My species do not feel emotions. We do not understand them." His hands clenched into fists. "But now I do. I feel things I should not. I react in ways I have never reacted before." Ethan's mind raced. He had always known Zevra's species was biologically different from humans. They were logical, detached, intelligent, but they didn't have emotions. But now Zevra did. And there was only one explanation. It started after the accident, the night he had walked in on Ethan. Ethan's chest tightened. "What did you see that night? When you walked in on me?" Zevra's gaze flickered, and his body stiffened. "I saw something I did not understand." His voice was barely a whisper. "I saw a human reaction I had never seen before." Ethan frowned. "You mean embarrassment?" Zevra nodded slowly. "Yes, but it was more than that. It was raw, uncontrolled, real." He hesitated, and when I saw it, something inside me shifted. Ethan's mouth went dry. That moment changed him. And somehow, in a way no one had ever thought possible, it had started turning Zevra into something else. Something human. The real danger begins. Ethan didn't know what to say. This wasn't just strange, it was impossible. But Zevra wasn't done. His breathing had quickened. Another human reaction that should have been impossible for him. His skin flickered again, his glowing blue light dimming for just a moment. Then he looked at Ethan, his expression unreadable. "There's something else." Ethan tensed. "What?" Zevra's voice dropped lower. "My people, they know." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean they know?" Zevra closed his eyes for a second, his fingers twitching. "My species monitors all of us. We are linked through a network, a subconscious connection." Ethan's heart pounded. "And?" Zevra slowly turned his gaze toward Ethan, his glowing eyes filled with something close to dread. "They have sensed my change." Silence filled the room. Then Zevra whispered the words that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "And they are coming to erase me." A dangerous discovery. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. "They're coming to erase you." His voice was barely above a whisper. Zevra didn't blink. "Yes." Ethan felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. "Erase, as in kill you." Zevra's glowing blue skin flickered, and for the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. "Not exactly. My kind does not kill. We reset." "Reset," Ethan repeated. Zevra slowly nodded. "If an anomaly is detected, if a member of my species develops traits that are deemed undesirable, their neural pathways are wiped clean." Ethan's breath caught. "You mean they'll erase your memories?" "All of them." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "You're telling me that if they find out you're feeling emotions, they'll just reboot your brain like a damn computer?" Zevra didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling inside him. "That's insane. You didn't do anything wrong." Zevra's jaw tightened. "To them, I have." The silent surveillance. Ethan paced the room, trying to think. "Okay, all right, let's not panic." Zevra exhaled sharply, something close to a human sigh, a reaction he never had before. "I believe we are beyond the point of not panicking." Ethan shot him a glare. "Not helping." He took a deep breath. "How do they know? How do they even detect this kind of thing?" Zevra hesitated. "We are linked." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean linked?" Zevra touched his temple. "My species do not communicate the way humans do. Our thoughts, our logic, our understanding. It is shared, connected through a collective consciousness, a hive mind, as humans would describe it." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, so they can read your thoughts?" "No." Zevra shook his head. "It is not mind reading. It is more like a constant background signal, a shared network. Most of the time, we do not even notice it. But when an anomaly occurs, when one of us deviates too far..." His voice trailed off. Ethan swallowed hard. "They send someone to fix the problem." Zevra nodded. Ethan clenched his fists. "And you're the problem now." "They're already here." A sudden beeping sound echoed from Zevra's wrist. Ethan's head snapped toward it. What was that? Zevra lifted his arm, revealing a small, sleek device embedded into his skin. His glowing fingers hovered over it, and his usually calm demeanor turned into something dangerously close to panic. "They are here." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What do you mean here?" Zevra looked at him, his expression grim. "A retrieval unit has arrived on campus." Ethan's heart pounded. "Are you kidding me?" "They're already here." Zevra nodded. "They move quickly when an anomaly is detected." Ethan turned toward the window, scanning the university grounds. Everything looked normal. Students walking, hoverbikes zooming past, nothing out of the ordinary. But then his eyes caught something. 3 figures, dressed in dark, seamless suits, moving in perfect sync toward their building. Their movements were too smooth, too precise. Not human. "Zevra," Ethan whispered. "We need to get out of here. Now." Zevra hesitated. "If we run, They will know I am resisting. Yeah, well, sitting here and waiting for them to brainwash you isn't a great alternative. Ethan hissed. Do you want to forget everything? Do you want to wake up tomorrow and have no idea who I am, who you are? Zevra stiffened. His glowing skin flickered, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Ethan thought he wouldn't move. Then, Zevra made a choice. Let's go. The escape. Ethan yanked open the door, glancing down the hall. Empty. For now. Zevra followed silently, his movements unnervingly smooth, his usual calm demeanor now tinged with something human. Nervousness. Do you have a way off the planet? Ethan whispered as they slipped into the stairwell. Zevra nodded. There is a transport hub in the outer district. I can hack into the network and forge a new identity. Ethan blinked. Wait, you can do that? Zevra didn't answer. Instead, he pressed his fingers against the wall, and for a brief second, the building's power flickered. Security cameras went dark. Ethan's jaw dropped. Dude. Zevra finally looked at him. I may not have emotions, but I am highly intelligent. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. Well, I'd say that's debatable at this point. They slipped out of the stairwell, stepping onto the deserted back alley of the university. So far, so good. Then, a voice echoed from behind them. Anomaly detected. Ethan whipped around, and his blood turned to ice. The three figures stood at the entrance of the alley. Their eyes were glowing, the same eerie blue as Zevra's, but with none of his depth. Emotionless, cold, perfectly synchronized. Zevra took a step back. The central figure tilted its head. You are unregistered. Unauthorized emotions detected. You must comply for reintegration. Zevra clenched his jaw. Ethan whispered, I don't think they're gonna take no for an answer. Zevra exhaled. Then, for the first time since Ethan had met him, he did something completely unexpected. He grabbed Ethan's arm and ran. A new instinct. Survival. The alley blurred past them as they sprinted, Ethan barely keeping up. What's the plan? I am working on it, Zevra muttered. That's not a plan. Behind them, the figures moved unnaturally fast, their smooth, coordinated movements gaining on them. Ethan's heart pounded. How strong are they? Zevra didn't look back. Stronger than me. Great. Fantastic. Love that. They turned a corner, dashing through the maze-like city streets. Zevra suddenly grabbed Ethan and yanked him into a side passage, pressing them against the wall. The retrieval unit passed by without noticing. Ethan held his breath. Okay, maybe we. The figures stopped. They turned their heads in eerie unison. One of them whispered, deviation detected. Zevra's grip on Ethan tightened. Run. And then, all hell broke loose. The escape plan. Ethan barely had time to think. 1 second, they were pressed against the alley wall, hoping the retrieval unit would pass them by. The next, the cold, robotic voice whispered, deviation detected. Then, they moved. The three figures turned, their heads snapping toward Ethan, and Zevra in perfect sync. Their glowing eyes pulsed once, twice. Then they rushed forward. Not walked, not ran. Glided. They moved with an unnatural speed, their bodies barely touching the ground, their forms a blur of seamless black and glowing blue. It was inhuman. Zevra grabbed Ethan's arm, his grip tight. Run. Ethan didn't argue. They bolted through the alleyways, dodging dumpsters, broken street lamps, and neon-lit signs that flickered in the dark. Hovercars zipped overhead, the city's night air thick with the hum of engines and voices, but Ethan barely heard anything past the pounding of his own heartbeat. Behind them, the retrieval unit closed in. They're too fast. Ethan gasped, sprinting as hard as he could. I know, Zevra said. His voice was strained, something Ethan had never heard before. Panic. No, something closer to fear. That made it worse. Ethan stole a glance behind them. Big mistake. One of the retrieval agents was right there. Too close. Ethan barely had time to react before an icy hand reached for his shoulder. Zevra shoved him aside at the last second. Ethan stumbled, nearly tripping over a loose cable on the ground. A split second later, a bright pulse of blue energy shot past where his head had been, hitting a nearby metal crate, which instantly disintegrated. Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh, great. They have death lasers. They are not lasers, Zevra corrected. Oh, excuse me. Let me be more specific while we're running for our lives. They have instant disintegration beams. Zevra didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed Ethan again and yanked him down a different path. The retrieval unit adjusted instantly, their glowing eyes narrowing. Non-compliance detected. Subject Zevra 34. Surrender. Zevra ignored them. Instead, he did something even crazier. He stopped. Ethan nearly ran into him. Dude, what? Zevra turned, raised a hand, and his entire body flickered. For a brief moment, his form distorted, glitching, warping, breaking apart like pixels on a dying screen. Then, a shockwave exploded from him. The air trembled. The nearby streetlights flickered violently, shattering one by one. A deep, thrumming hum filled the alley, vibrating through Ethan's bones. And for the first time, the retrieval unit staggered back. Ethan watched in shock as the three figures reeled, their glowing eyes flickering. The leader's voice crackled. Disruption detected. Source unknown. Then, just as quickly, Zevra collapsed. Ethan caught him before he hit the ground. Zev. Hey, what the hell was that? Zevra's skin flickered erratically, his breathing ragged. A pulse. Short range. Neural disruption. His voice was weak, his usual perfect articulation breaking. It will only last 30 seconds. Ethan's eyes widened. That wasn't nearly enough time. He looked up. The retrieval unit was already recovering. They only had seconds. Come on, Ethan muttered. He hoisted Zevra up and ran. The underground connection. Ethan didn't stop running until they reached the lower district. The underground. The streets here were different. Darker, messier. The neon glow of the main city barely touched this place. The roads were cracked. Old cables hung from above like broken spiderwebs, and the air smelled of engine oil and forgotten history. It was perfect. No cameras, no drones, no government control. Just the place to hide. Ethan ducked into a rusted-out warehouse, pulling Zevra inside. He slammed the metal door shut behind them, breathing hard. Zevra groaned softly, still weak. His glowing skin dimmed, flickering like a dying light bulb. Ethan crouched beside him. You okay? Zevra exhaled slowly. That was not optimal. Yeah, no kidding. Ethan rubbed his forehead. What even was that? That thing you did back there? Zevra hesitated. I am not sure. Ethan frowned. You're not sure. Zevra sat up weakly. His hands trembled slightly, something Ethan had never seen before. It was instinct. Ethan stared. Instinct? You mean like a reaction? Zevra nodded slowly. Yes, it was not planned. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Aliens like Zevra weren't supposed to have instincts. They were logical, calculated. Every movement, every action, planned, precise, controlled. But what just happened? That was human. Zevra met his gaze. His glowing blue eyes flickered, something unreadable in them. I am changing faster than I expected. Ethan exhaled sharply. Yeah, no kidding. Then, a new voice spoke from the shadows. You're lucky you made it this far. Ethan and Zevra whipped around. A figure stepped forward from the dark, their face partially hidden beneath a hood, their voice sharp and knowing. Ethan tensed. Who the hell are you? The figure tilted their head. I'm the only one who can keep you alive. Zevra's eyes narrowed. You know what is happening to me. The figure gave a small smile. Yes. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Then start talking. The figure lowered their hood. They weren't human. Their eyes glowed, not blue like Zevra's, but golden. And when they spoke, their voice was calm, certain. You're not the first of your kind to change, Zevra. Silence filled the room. Then, and you won't be the last. The chase begins. Ethan stared at the stranger, his mind racing. You're not the first of your kind to change, Zevra. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Zevra, still weak from his neural disruption blast, straightened slightly. His glowing blue eyes locked onto the hooded figure, his voice quiet but firm. You are saying there have been others. The stranger smirked. Now you're asking the right questions. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Yeah? Then how about you actually answer them? The figure took a step forward, pulling back their hood fully. Their golden eyes glowed in the dim light, and Ethan realized something. They weren't human. Not like Zevra's species either, but something else. Their skin had an iridescent sheen, shifting between shades of bronze and silver. Thin patterns, like circuits, ran along their arms. Their posture was too controlled, too precise. Yet their expression carried something Zevra's people weren't supposed to have. Emotion. Zevra inhaled sharply. You are an exile. Ethan blinked. A what? The stranger gave a small nod. Smart one, aren't you? Zevra's jaw tightened. The exiled ones are a myth, a story told to reinforce obedience. The stranger chuckled. That's what they want you to believe. They turned toward Ethan. And your human friend here. He just got caught up in something bigger than he can imagine. Ethan folded his arms. Yeah, well, that's kinda becoming a theme this week. Mind explaining why? The stranger exhaled. First, we need to move. Zevra stiffened. They are still tracking me. Yes. The stranger nodded. And if we stay here any longer, they'll be on us in minutes. Ethan's stomach twisted. He glanced at Zevra, who looked equally tense. The retrieval unit wasn't just some simple enforcement squad. They were ruthless, efficient, relentless. And they wouldn't stop. The stranger gestured toward a metal doorway at the back of the warehouse. There's a passage that leads to the underground's core. Once we're inside, they won't be able to track you as easily. Zevra hesitated. Why are you helping us? The stranger smiled. Because I used to be just like you. Then they turned and ran into the shadows. Ethan glanced at Zevra. We following them? Zevra hesitated, then nodded. We do not have a choice. The underground's dark secret. The passage was narrow, damp, and far too quiet. Ethan followed behind the stranger, his mind buzzing with questions. Zevra moved beside him, his glowing skin casting faint blue light against the dark walls. So, Ethan muttered, you gonna tell me what's actually going on, or do we just keep running forever? The stranger didn't stop walking. The truth, human. Your friend here isn't the only one who's changing. Ethan glanced at Zevra. You mean, there are more of you? Zevra looked uncertain. That is not possible. The stranger sighed. That's what I thought, too, before they try to erase me. Zevra froze. Ethan's stomach dropped. Wait, you're saying they tried to? The stranger turned, pulling back their sleeve. Beneath their iridescent skin was a scar. Thin, precise, almost surgical, but deep, unnatural. They wiped me, the stranger said quietly. Or at least they tried. Zevra stared. But that has never been done before. The stranger smirked. Yeah, well, never is kind of a funny word, isn't it? Ethan frowned. So, what? You just survived it. The stranger shook their head. Not exactly. The process failed. Something in me resisted. Instead of erasing me, they severed my connection to the hive mind. That's how I ended up here. A ghost. An anomaly. A mistake. Ethan's throat felt dry. And now they're trying to do the same thing to Zev. The stranger's expression darkened. They won't fail this time. No more running. They finally reached the end of the passage, a hidden chamber lit by dim, flickering lights. It wasn't large, but it was filled with tech Ethan had never seen before. Alien consoles, advanced data screens, and strange devices pulsing with energy. The stranger gestured for Zevra to sit in a metallic chair. If we want to save you, we need to break your connection to the hive mind before they get here. Zevra hesitated. Severing the link could kill me. The stranger's golden eyes softened. It's the only way to stop them from tracking you. Ethan stepped forward. Hold on, there's gotta be another way. What if we just hide you? The strangers shook their head. You don't get it, human. This isn't just about him. If Zevra is changing, then that means others can change too. They turned toward Zevra. That means everything your people believe in is a lie. Zevra was silent. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. And if we don't do this, the stranger's voice was grim. They'll find him. As if on cue, a loud explosion shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling. The walls trembled. Zevra's head snapped up. They are here. Ethan's pulse spiked. The stranger cursed. We're out of time. Zevra, sit down. Now. Zevra hesitated only for a second. Then he stepped forward and lowered himself into the chair. The stranger moved fast, attaching thin wires to Zevra's temple. The alien flinched, his fingers gripping the armrests. Ethan knelt beside him. Hey, are you sure about this? Zevra met his gaze, something unfamiliar flickering in his eyes. Something human. I do not wish to forget, Zevra said quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen. The final stand. The doors burst open. The retrieval unit stormed in, weapons raised. Ethan stepped in front of Zevra, heart pounding. Yeah, nope, you're not touching him. The lead retrieval officer didn't even hesitate. Step aside, human. Ethan didn't move. Make me. The retrieval officer raised a glowing device. And suddenly, the entire room went dark. For a moment, silence. Then, Zevra gasped. His body shuddered, his glowing blue skin flickering, then flaring brighter than ever before. The air hummed. The retrieval unit stepped back. Zevra slowly stood, the wires falling from his skin. His eyes, once cold and calculating, blazed with something entirely new. Emotion. He lifted a hand. A deep pulse of energy rippled outward. And the retrieval unit collapsed. Ethan's jaw dropped. Holy, Zev, did you just? Zevra exhaled. His voice was calm, steady. I am not like them anymore. The stranger grinned. Looks like we just started a war. Ethan laughed breathlessly. Yeah, well, if we did. He looked at Zevra. Then we'd better win. The ultimate sacrifice. The silence after the battle was deafening. The retrieval unit lay motionless on the ground, their glowing eyes dark, their sleek black armor cracked. The pulse of energy Zevra had unleashed had knocked them out cold. Ethan took a shaky breath, his heart still hammering in his chest. Did you just take them all down? Zevra stood there, his body glowing brighter than ever, his hands still faintly crackling with residual energy. But his face, his expression, was no longer emotionless. He was breathing hard. His gaze flickered toward his hands, fingers twitching, as if he himself couldn't believe what he had done. I did not know I could do that, he murmured. The stranger chuckled. Well, congratulations. You're officially the most dangerous anomaly in existence. Ethan didn't laugh. He had a bad feeling. Something wasn't right. Zevra looked different. His usual smooth, almost artificial movements had changed. He stood like a human. His eyes no longer glowed with the cold, empty precision of his kind. But Ethan could see it, the exhaustion, the flickering of his light, the strain on his body. "Zev, are you okay?" Ethan asked. Zevra hesitated. Then he stumbled. Ethan caught him just in time. Hey, what's happening?" Ethan tried to keep him steady, but Zevra's body was trembling violently. The stranger stepped closer, their golden eyes narrowing. His connection was just severed from the hive mind. His body is reacting to the sudden independence. Ethan's stomach twisted. What does that mean? The stranger's face darkened. It means he's dying. The cost of freedom. Ethan refused to believe it. "There has to be something we can do," he said, helping Zevra sit down against the metal wall of the chamber. "You just got your free will. Man, you're not gonna die on me now." Zevra took a slow, shaky breath. "I am not built for this." Ethan's chest tightened. "Built? You're not a machine, Zev." Zevra's glowing eyes met his. "I was designed to exist within the collective. Without it, I am." His voice wavered, as if he couldn't quite process it himself. Incomplete. The stranger knelt beside them. This has happened before. Every time a deviant is cut off, their body begins to shut down. The neural pathways collapse. The hive mind isn't just a connection. It's a power source. Without it, they didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Then we have to reconnect him." Zevra shook his head. "If I reconnect, they will erase me." Silence. Ethan looked at the stranger, desperate. "You survived." "How?" The stranger hesitated. "I didn't just break the connection," they said. "I rewrote it." Ethan frowned. "What?" The stranger exhaled. "The hive mind is like a machine, right? When you remove a part, the whole thing starts to break. But if you replace the broken part with something new, something different, it can adapt." Ethan felt his breath catch. "You changed your own programming." The stranger nodded. "And that's what we need to do for Zevra." Zevra looked at them, his face unreadable. "That is dangerous." The stranger smirked. "Yeah, well, so is dying. The final choice." The chamber's power flickered, casting deep shadows against the walls. Zevra's glow was dimming, his once vibrant energy fading. Ethan refused to let him go. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "What do we have to do?" The stranger turned to one of the consoles, their fingers moving swiftly over the alien interface. A holographic display flared to life, showing Zevra's neural patterns. They pointed at the tangled web of energy. "See that? That's the damaged part of his system. We need to overwrite it with something new." Ethan frowned. "Like what?" The stranger hesitated. Then, slowly, they turned toward Ethan. "Like you." Ethan blinked. "What?" The stranger leaned forward. "You said it yourself. He's becoming human. His body is rejecting the old connection, but if we replace it with a new one, something organic, he might survive." Zevra's gaze flickered toward Ethan. His breathing was shallower now, his body struggling to stay upright. Ethan swallowed. "And you're saying I should be the replacement?" The stranger nodded. "We link your mind to his. Instead of the hive mind keeping him alive, you will." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He barely knew Zevra. A few days ago, he was just a weird alien roommate who didn't understand personal space. Now he was on the verge of sacrificing himself to save him. Ethan turned to Zevra. "What do you want to do?" Zevra was quiet for a long time. His glowing blue eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw something there that hadn't been there before. Not logic, not calculation. Something real. "I do not want to die," Zevra whispered. "I do not want to forget." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then let's do this." The human connection. The stranger worked fast. They attached small neural implants to both Ethan and Zevra. wires connecting them to the main console. The room hummed with energy, and Ethan could feel the static in the air. "This is going to hurt," the stranger warned. Ethan smirked. "Yeah, well, that's kind of my specialty." Then, the world went white. A jolt of energy ripped through his mind, sharp and blinding, like someone was tearing through his very thoughts. And suddenly, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was somewhere else, floating in a vast, endless void. A cold blue space filled with shifting lights and fragmented memories. Zevra's mind. Ethan turned and saw Zevra standing there, flickering, fading. Ethan stepped forward. "Zev, you hear me?" Zevra looked up. His expression was unreadable. "I do not belong here." Ethan shook his head. "You don't belong to them anymore either." Zevra hesitated. "Then what am I?" Ethan reached out. "You're you. And if you trust me, I'll make sure you stay that way." Zevra stared at him. Then, slowly, he took Ethan's hand. The moment their hands touched, a pulse of energy exploded outward. The void shattered, and suddenly, they were back, reborn. Ethan gasped, his body jerking upright. His mind was spinning, his limbs trembling. Zevra sat across from him, alive. His skin was still glowing, but different now. No longer flickering, no longer unstable. He was whole. Ethan let out a breathless laugh. "Holy shit. We did it." Zevra exhaled, testing his fingers, his movements more fluid than before. He looked at Ethan, and then he smiled. The stranger raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's new." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, and I think I kinda like it." But outside, in the dark skies above, something loomed. The hive mind had noticed, and they were coming. The last goodbye, or a new beginning. The air was thick with tension. Ethan, still feeling the aftershocks of the neural link, sat on the cold metal floor, breathing heavily. His body ached, his mind felt stretched, but he was alive. They both were. Zevra sat across from him, no longer flickering, no longer weak. His blue glow had stabilized, pulsing with something new, something human. The stranger, standing nearby, tapped impatiently on the console. "Well, congratulations. You just rewrote the laws of your species." Zevra flexed his fingers, looking at them with curiosity. He tilted his head slightly, then he smiled. Ethan froze. It wasn't a forced mechanical movement. It wasn't a mimicry of human expression. It was real. "You've smiled," Ethan whispered. Zevra blinked. "Yes." He tested the movement again, as if it were a newly discovered muscle. "It feels unusual." Ethan chuckled. "Welcome to being human, buddy." But before anyone could celebrate, a deep mechanical hum shook the building. The lights flickered. The air turned cold. Zevra's glowing eyes widened. "They are here." Ethan pushed himself to his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins. "You mean the retrieval unit?" Zevra's expression darkened. "No." A pause. Then, in a voice laced with dread, he whispered, "The hive mind itself. The arrival of the collective." A sound filled the air, a chorus of thousands of voices whispering at once. It was not spoken. It was felt. A pressure in the skull, a static hum in the nerves. It was ancient, endless, powerful. Ethan clutched his head. "Oh, hell no. I do not like that." The stranger's golden eyes narrowed. "They're communicating directly." Zevra stood still, his expression unreadable. Then, his body jerked. His glowing blue skin dimmed for a moment. His posture stiffened, like he was being pulled back into something invisible. Ethan grabbed his arm. "Zev. Hey, stay with me, man." Zevra gasped, eyes unfocused. "They are calling me back." Ethan's grip tightened. "Screw that. You don't belong to them anymore." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls, shaking the very ground beneath them. Then, a rift tore open in the air, a gate of pure energy. And from it, they emerge. Figures, dozens of them, moving in perfect unison, glowing eyes locked onto Zevra. The hive mind itself had arrived. The final stand. The leader stepped forward, its voice ringing in Zevra's mind. You are broken. You will be restored. Zevra's body shook, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Ethan stepped in front of him. Yeah, see, that's not gonna happen. The hive mind did not turn to Ethan. It did not acknowledge his existence at all. It only spoke to Zevra. You are one of us. You have always been one of us. Zevra clutched his head, his glowing eyes flickering. I am not. The hive mind's voice was relentless. Surrender. Reconnect. Be whole again. The pressure in the room intensified. Zevra groaned, his hands trembling. His form flickered, glitching between what he was and what he used to be. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew what was happening. They were trying to overwrite him. Turn him back into the emotionless drone he used to be. No, Ethan growled. He grabbed Zevra by the shoulders. Zev, listen to me. You're not them anymore. You don't belong to them. Zevra's eyes flickered wildly, his body pulsing with unstable energy. I do not know who I am. Ethan shook him. You're Zevra, my best friend. My pain-in-the-ass roommate who drinks coffee even though he hates it. The guy who risked everything to be free. That's who you are. Zevra's breath hitched. His fingers twitched. The hive mind's presence loomed closer. You are nothing without us. Ethan's grip tightened. His voice softened. You're not nothing, Zev. Zevra looked at him. And in that moment, he made his choice. The rebellion begins. Zevra turned to face the hive mind, his expression no longer conflicted, no longer afraid. I choose. He took a deep breath. To be free. Then, he raised his hands. Energy exploded outward, slamming into the hive's enforcers. The link that had bound him to them snapped. The hive mind reeled back, its voices splintering, as if it could not comprehend what had just happened. Zevra took a step forward, his eyes burning with newfound power. You said I was nothing without you. He clenched his fists. You were wrong. With one final pulse of energy, he severed the connection completely. The hive mind's presence collapsed. The figures shuddered, their glowing eyes flickering, then fading. One by one, they fell. And then, there was silence. A new beginning. Ethan slowly exhaled, staring at the fallen hive members. Did we just win? Zevra staggered slightly, looking down at his hands. At himself. I do not know. The stranger chuckled, shaking their head. Well, whatever just happened, you sure as hell aren't one of them anymore. Zevra looked at Ethan. I am. Not sure what I am. Ethan grinned. You're you. That's enough. Zevra was silent for a moment. Then, he smiled again. A real, genuine, human smile. Ethan clapped him on the back. Come on. We've got a galaxy to explore. Zevra tilted his head. Together. Ethan laughed. Dan right. They turned toward the doorway, stepping into a world that was now forever changed. And for the first time, Zevra was truly free.